Now I would like to welcome Azzam Abdelkarim, a khatib and lecturer, to give a speech on justice and oppression.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. As usual, we begin by the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most gracious, the most merciful, the all-powerful. We invoke peace and blessings upon His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We ask His help to teach us that which benefit us and to benefit us with that He taught us and to increase us in knowledge. We talk about change. We talk about justice. We talk about oppression. We talk about many things. But I have one question for you that oftentimes the youngsters ask: who am I? What am I doing here? Do we understand who we are? Do we understand our makeup? Because if we take the time to understand our makeup and how Islam came to guide us and all these different parts that make me as a human being, we have better chances of effecting that change that everyone is talking about. So I will begin with that, and then I will talk about the concept of justice in Islam, and then I will talk about the concept of oppression in Islam. First and foremost, we are a being that consists of three different parts. Some we understand, some we don't. The part that is physical is our limbs, our bodies, our ears, our facets of the world. That's the physical being of us. That's one part. The second part is the mind. What is the mind? The mind is khalq nurani. Nurani means it's a vision, it's a way of perceiving things, it's a way of understanding things, it's a way of pondering and conducting all these wonderful mental activities. And then the ruh is the spirit. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. They ask you about the spirit, say the spirit is a matter that is solely known by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have not given you from knowledge, but very little. So, الروح نفخة غيبية. It's a matter of غيب. It's a matter of the unknown that we can never understand. But I want to talk about Islam from the perspective how it came to deal with this human being and set the record straight on how to understand ourselves and then how to apply Islam to effect that change that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be in. So we read in the hadith عن أبي حفص عمر بن الخطاب, in the long hadith where Jibreel alayhi salam comes in the form of a man. As the Sahaba gathered in the presence of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best teacher to ever walk the face of the earth, and he began to ask questions as he sat in front of him, and he leaned his knees against the knees of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says, أخبرني عن الإسلام. Tell me about Islam. And we all know, alhamdulillah, as Muslims, the 5 pillars of Islam. أن تشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله وتقيم الصلاة وتؤتي الزكاة وتصوم رمضان وتحج البيت إن استطعت إليه سبيلا. So these are the 5 pillars of Islam. These are the actionable items that came to deal with the body, the physical being of the human being, to uplift him from a world that is attached to the materials, to a world that elevates him to be qualified to enter a paradise, the width of which is the heavens and the earth, where an eye's never seen, an ear's ever heard, or even the imagination of a human being ever reached. If we look at our ibadat, our pillars of Islam, that there are these vehicles that are gonna detach us from the material world and attach us to our Creator, then we qualify to be awliya Allah. Those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about أَلَا إِنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. That those who are the allies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have nothing to fear. Who are they? الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who entrust in Him. Those who believe that victory comes none but from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who know that they could not even make a move, not even a cell in their body can continue to survive without the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who acknowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created everything for them, has honored them in so many different ways, has guided them by sending the prophets and the messengers and the divine revelations, and has created them for one sole purpose, and that is to worship Him and to obey Him every step of the way. The second part of Islam, and Islam is made up of three different parts that cannot be separated. So when we talk about Islam, Iman and Ihsan, we're not talking about three different religions. We're talking about one religion. One religion that makes up this wonderful deen of ours. Then Jibreel alayhi salam proceeded to ask the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Akhbirni anil iman." Tell me about faith. What is your understanding of faith? قال أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر والقضاء خيره وشره. You believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His prophets, His messengers, His revelations, the day of judgment, predestination, preordination. You believe in all of that. Now I'm speaking in generalities now, because if I was to speak in details, you'll be here till next Saturday. Because these are all subjects that cover our deen. And this is why we as Muslims have fell behind, because we fail to understand our deen. So this is the part which is Iman, that addresses which part of us? Anybody can tell me? It addresses the mind. It addresses the mind. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this divine way of understanding the world. Divine way of learning how to think. And learning how to think is far more important than thinking itself. Many people cause so much damage and so much harm to themselves thinking without a value system, without a frame of reference, without a way to authenticate whether the ideas and the thoughts that come to their heads are valuable, are authentic, are true, or they're false. And that's why in the very first ayah that was revealed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? Iqra, and stop there? No. He said, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Because if you read for any other objective, for any other reason, you are bound to go astray. You are bound to go astray. So the pillars of Iman came to deal with the mind and to shape it and to enhance the fitrah, the predisposition, to render and surrender all of our affairs to our Creator. Because He knows what's best for us. We don't. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, the master of the children of Adam, he used to say, Allahumma la takilni li nafsi tarfata ayn. Oh Allah, do not leave me to myself, not even the blink of an eye. Some of us walk around and think that we are the most intelligent people on the face of the earth. I don't need Islam, I don't need Iman, I don't need this, I don't need that, I can do it by myself. And this is nothing but hot air from Satan, wal-iyadu billah. And if this person takes the time to think what their body is going to be like 3 days after they buried 6 foot under, they would know the certainty of knowledge that they had absolutely no authority, no qualifications to walk on the face of the earth with arrogance. Absolutely none. And then the third part of Islam, as Jibreel alayhi salam asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam by saying, "Akhbirni anil ihsan." Tell me about ihsan, perfection of one's deeds. قال أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. That you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you see Him, with that level of caution, with that level of concern. And if you cannot achieve that level, worship Him knowing that He sees you every step of the way. And knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us every step of the way will keep us in shape, will keep us on the straight path. So this is who we are, and this is what Islam came to shape this human being and effect a change that makes this ummah an ummah of leadership. And this is why the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ were successful in every step of the way, in every aspect of divine and worldly knowledge. Without this, we are bound to go astray. We are bound to stay a weak ummah. I just wanted to lay this as a foundation for us to understand what Islam has come to accomplish and to guarantee for us, which is my second point, and then I will conclude inshallah with the third point. So my second point, what is the concept of justice in Islam? If we understand the significance of justice and what justice means, we understand how to proceed on just basis. with the right methodology, with the right philosophy and understanding of the concept of justice in Islam. Number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِظَلَّامٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in no form or shape will cause any injustice to His slaves. And He says in the authentic hadith, the hadith al-Qudsi, يا عبادي إني حرمت الظلم على نفسي وجعلته بينكم محرما فلا تظالموا. O my slaves, I have made injustice forbidden upon me. Upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I similarly made it forbidden upon you. Do not cause injustice to one another. Do not oppress yourself and do not oppress others. Similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded His prophets by saying, يا داود إنا جعلناك خليفة في الأرض فاحكم بين الناس بالحق ولا تتبع الهوى. David was given the wisdom and the divine revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to run the affairs of His people according to justice. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made him a khalifa, and He commanded him to rule among people on all matters of religious and worldly life on the basis of truth. فَاحْكُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ بِالْحَقِّ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions something that is extremely important, that the majority of people fall into this trap, including many Muslims. And He says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعِ الْهَوَى. Do not follow your whims and desires. Do not follow what you think. Do not follow what appears to you to be the right way to do it without having that frame of reference, that divine guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not favor one over another because he's a relative, he's white, he's black, he's green, he's from this town, he's from that town. Be just and fair among all. Why? Because those who follow their whims and desires and their own way of thinking, they are bound to go astray. And they have forgotten about the day of reckoning that is going to be done by the infinite justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us as people to avoid injustice. Islam came to guarantee 6 basic rights for people, Muslims and non-Muslims. Number 1, the right to choose their religion. لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbids us as Muslims to compel one to embrace Islam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came to protect the mind. And that's why He created us upon the predisposition to the worship of one and only one God, to surrender all of our affairs to Him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came to protect the nafs, the soul of the human being. Because He's the one who brought it into existence, and no one can take it out of existence without just cause. And in the hadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that if this dunya in its entirety to perish, it is lighter in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the bloodshed of one single believer without just cause. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guaranteed for us our honor, meaning that the integrity of the lineage of the human being is guaranteed, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made, fornication prohibited. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guaranteed us our land and the health of our bodies, and that's why He says in the Quran, أُحِلَّتْ لَكُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَحُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمُ الْخَبَائِثُ. All that is good for you is permissible, and all that is bad for you is forbidden. And your wealth is sacred, and this is something was emphasized in the final sermon of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So we come to the third part, and I think I have 1 minute left, right? Jazakallah khair. So the third part is oppression. اتقوا الظلم فإن الظلم ظلمات يوم القيامة. Avoid oppression and injustice to one another, because on Judgment Day you will pay with your hasanat. And if you run out, you will take from the sayyi'at of those whom you have caused injustice to. In a nutshell, oppression is the absence of justice. Oppression is the absence of justice. For example, if one is to refuse to embrace Islam, they have caused tremendous injustice to themselves. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the heavens and the earth and all, has legislated this deen for us as a system of guidance and achieving happiness in this dunya and in the hereafter. And measure on that everything else. And I will conclude in 30 seconds for us to remember 3 things. Number 1, وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. Victory comes not but from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ was oppressed. And we know many stories how he was oppressed. His companions were oppressed. And he used to say to them, صبرا آل ياسر فإن موعدكم الجنة. They were weak. They couldn't do much. So he would say, persevere in patience. The price is right. The price is paradise. The price is paradise. Number two is to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for Islam to be victorious at the hands of the Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for Islam to be victorious at the hands of the Muslims. Meaning that you and I need to hold this deen up high, understand it, apply it, in order for us to be qualified to achieve this victory. Number three, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us in every possible way. He tests us with bounties, and He commands us to be grateful to Him. And He tests us with hardships and calamities to purify us and to see who is truly committed to their deen and who is not. And that's why we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sunnah, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلْهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. Sometimes we are on the bottom because of our own wrongdoing and our lack of commitment. And sometimes it's a test. Imagine if Islam and the Muslims were strong at all times. Everybody's going to want to be a Muslim. Nobody's going to be a non-Muslim. So these are tests, but the price is right. And I will conclude with this ayah for us to keep in mind, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُمْ بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already made a deal with us. In other words, do not nullify your commitment and your covenants to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala under any set of circumstances. He has already bought that nafs that He has given you. And He has already bought that wealth that He bestowed upon you. What is the price? بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. That Jannah is yours. We're going to die. You know, everybody in this room already has a death sentence past 50,000 years before the creation of the heavens and the earth. We're all going to die. The question is, are you going to die standing upright for justice? Or are you going to die in a hospital bed, or in a car accident, or an airplane accident, or any of that? Something to keep in perspective, that not living up to the commitment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to spare us, the consequences of this dunya. أقول قولي هذا واستغفروه سبحانك اللهم بحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين جزاكم الله خير السلام عليكم.
Thank you, Brother Abdelkarim.